As an operator, you strive to build simple systems because simple systems are smooth and smooth is fast.
Operations isn't just about systems and processes. It's about how people interact with systems and processes.
Maximum of flavour, minimum of fuss.
Hi, everyone. Hey.
Hello, welcome.
Thanks. I'm really impressed that we thought we could do dinner this week at 9 p.m. And Dimple, when I'm not going to call you out as the first person to cancel, but when you did, every other one of us was just straight up relieved and happy.
I will happily put my hand up for being the first person to cancel. I haven't done dinner at 9 p.m. since I was like 21 years old. I don't know what I was thinking.
It's very ambitious of us. And yeah, Rob, you were going to do 2 dinners in one night, which that was double ambitious.
I was going to do 2 dinners at one night. Yeah, which by the time I finished my first dinner, I realised would have been an absolutely ridiculous choice.
Could you have eaten the second?
Clear.
I did a kind of, the first dinner was kind of like a small plates kind of place. It was really good actually. Omar, Borough Market, try it out. It's lovely.
You're such a foodie, you see, because also like me doing 2 dinners would have been like, okay, well, Pizza Express and then something else. Well, it's like Rob goes full in.
Cheeseburger and nuggets.
So like you do.
Well, when I was picking, it's intense. When I was picking the restaurant, I was like, oh no, Rob's coming. I need to like pick somewhere good. I can't just pick somewhere random because proper foodie. I felt the pressure.
No,
so.
I don't. I'm completely happy to eat whatever.
As long as robots are serving his meals.
As long as
it's Michelin 2-star.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll reschedule. We'll do it soon, and we will make sure it's robot focused and right. Michelin stars and 6 p.m. I feel like we're now into the early bird phase of our lives, so that's fine.
You've been there a while.
Well, so we have a slightly different format that we're changing to now. So we're not going to do the news. We're going to go right into the topic. So first of all, let's hi to everyone. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. By way of quick introductions, hi, I'm Kristen, deep tech COO by background, currently working with lots of different scaling businesses through Highliner, and our resident DJ, although we're cutting out some of our memes and music, so I don't know if I still have a role, but I will try as the moderator. Dimple Patel, former COO of Truva, current CEO of Nature Metrics. We still let her come even though she's a CEO because we think she's the executive we all want to be. JB, former COO of SoftBank, previous chief of staff at Google, currently building something mad scientisty with AI. We'll figure that out at some point. And Rob, who, this is a very exciting one too, guys, because Rob, who's been a guest multiple times before, as we all agreed, as friendship-wise too, Rob is now just going to be official. He's here all the time. So welcome officially to the gang, Rob.
Thank you.
We're excited you're here.
Great to be here.
Yay. Every week now, you can't get away from us. So this week, okay, I picked this topic because 1, I was thinking about it with a company, but B, because JB and I have multiple times hinted around this topic and never actually discussed if we have opposing viewpoints or not, which I think we might. But so what we're talking about is pay and leveling, which I think we probably are maybe aligned, but would be helpful to think about how we all practically do it, but also how that relates to pay transparency and how you think about pay transparency. So
can I add one?
That's what we're going to do.
Add one point onto that as well? Can we also talk about it how as it applies at different points of the company's life cycle?
Yeah, and how once you make the decision,
and then how do you
and
change
how you change
the
that
system
decision
once you've got a culture of doing it one way or the other?
Yeah. So should we start with the simpler, which is like pay leveling, and through different phases of the pay leveling, but performance leveling, levels in general. Let's just start there. Different times. When do you bring it in? Do you do like, when do you think about it? And what are some of like core principles when you're first putting it in? Or do you not and just let things run free?
Ooh, who's going to go first?
I can go first just because I had a minor heart attack when Kristen said, do you just let things run free? No, you do not. You never do that. That is a recipe for chaos.
What, just people demand what they want. Whoever's loudest gets what they say.
You give out promotions like left, right, and center. Just anytime ask for it, and then you give out titles like Grand Wizard of Data because it keeps people happy. I mean, no, just no. So where am I on this? I think there's a few things. So one is, I think seniority leveling and having some structure around that is really important. And I think it's important fairly early. So around Series A, like you need to start putting that in, especially when the business is becoming more cross-functional. So where you can't have a founder or a C-level person, providing the seniority behind every single cross-functional conversation that needs to happen. People need to be able to make judgment calls in terms of, well, I understand the seniority in my function, and this person's actually equally senior in their function, and they've asked me to do X. So I think you put those in quite early. I think you have very clear performance requirements that dictate how you move from one level to the next. So if somebody is not at head of level, do not give them the head of title. You give them a very clear plan as to how they get there, but you have to put in kind of the skill sets and the competencies behind those quite early on as well. But then actually where I'm a little bit more flexible is on the compensation side of things, because I think you can have really great performers in the roles that they are doing today, that you need to have a little bit of flexibility to reward without having to throw a promotion at them. Pause there. Those are my.
So how do you do that? As a bonus? Well, do you do that as
bonuses,
a bonus, or do you just do that as high
bonuses or slightly wider pay banding? So you can have like your standard and then your exceptional, and exceptional could be an additional 10% or whatever. But that way people don't come to you asking for promotion just because they want to be paid more.
Yeah. What about when you go in though? Okay, guys, I'm interested because I bet you've gone in where it's not in place. So putting it in place.
My opinion's changed on this whole topic. Ooh. In that I used to be very much in the Dimple camp of like, why the hell wouldn't you have this and be rigorous? And in fact, stronger than that, which is like, this has been invented like multiple times. And so it's not only why wouldn't you have this, there is an answer. And that answer has some variance around it, but not much in terms of what best practice is for firms under a certain size. Let's call it 300 people, let's say. And so I was very much in that camp, and still am in that camp when you are north of 100 people, or older than 3 years, i.e. when people have been hired and they have to go through a promotion cycle because they've been around long enough to promote or not. So those are the two sort of boundary conditions. But I used to be of the philosophy, and this should always be the case all the way down. And I think I've sort of adapted I think my point of view has been that actually when you're below a certain size, actually it's just not the highest thing on the radar to do. And you can just hack and get away with it. And you don't even know what the product is. You don't even know how good people are. You don't even know how good the managers are. And so just embrace that if you are less than 30 people, this isn't the highest thing on the priority. Hire people. Do not give out C-suite titles, but you can give out all other titles that you want and fix it as and when you've got a product and or funding and or revenue. So I suppose I'm in the philosophy of careful about founder titles and C-suites when you're sub 30 people, but honestly, don't worry about too much of the rest. Just don't do anything like radically stupid, and don't over fixate on it anyway, because it's a distraction. But somewhere between 30 and 100, you have to confront this. But when you confront it, my perspective is people know what a bicycle looks like. Bicycles have two wheels. Just implement that and don't get too hung up on trying to be too weird and reinvent things, and do it as fast and strongly as possible. Pay is a second order thing for me. So I sort of adapt through your Dimple, and it really matters to Rob's point, like where on that cycle you are. And mostly, I suspect folks like us will have tripped into the scenario Kristen you faced, which is that you've now joined a 60-person firm, or God forbid, a 150-person firm, that nobody's really done this properly. And so it is all chaotic, painful, or whatever else. And then that's just part of the journey. So I suppose that Dimple's my addition, which is like size matters.
I agree with that, actually. Yeah.
Size matters.
Yeah. I found it, so we did it when our business was, most recent business anyway, was kind of 40-ish people. But it's interesting, we did a leveling and a progression plan for the teams that were largest, but the smaller, but again, kind of you've got to think functionally which teams scale more as your business grows. So in my business, it's got a lot of operational folk, kind of front of line folks. So we put structure and leveling and also pay banding for those roles. Big believer in pay banding, not in having a salary for a role. There's not enough flexibility. But we haven't in, finance, where our finance team's much smaller, or, whatever other teams that are kind of much smaller, we haven't put it in because it just felt artificial. So it's kind of both the size of the org, but also within that, the functional teams, whether or not you can do it within those teams. But then it feels like for those, it was easier because there are such defined roles within, for example, for your finance team. Everybody knows what a finance controller with X experience is going to get in certain size organizations. So actually benchmarking is much more straightforward. And you also know what role they're going to go for next, because it's quite a defined path and you don't have to kind of make up your own leveling system for it.
Yeah. I disagree with you, Rob.
Of course.
Stay at the firm. And only because I have done that a couple of times and I found it painful, but not for the reason I found it painful. It was the cross team. If the finance team doesn't have any leveling, or these other things don't have any leveling, when a finance person who now may be accountant person goes and talks to the engineering team or the sales team and they do have leveling, they sort of, nobody can quite, it's just a bit fluffy how they all cross a line.
Where do they fit relationally to each other?
Exactly. And particularly, I'm less worried about finance and HR because those people typically are sensible and organized and good at these things. It's particularly an issue where I've seen it done where the engineering team does a good leveling job, but the sales team doesn't. Because it's like, screw that. We all just get paid on compensation anyway, so it's all irrelevant. It's like that creates problems for you. Or has created problems for me.
I think
go on.
I would actually add, though, to your point, Rob, is like, how much does that team interact with the rest of the business, right?
Yeah, okay.
Because, if your front of house team actually is almost like a self-contained unit that on a day-to-day basis isn't interacting with the finance team, the engineers, sales, etc., and they need that structure to be able to operate. Like, you need people that are like running shifts, you need people that have like certain responsibilities, there have to be hierarchies within that, then I think that makes a lot of sense. But again, we've added another layer of nuance. So
exactly.
As well as level of overlap between that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also kind of for me, the important consideration is the entry point for somebody into your business. So again, if you're genuinely taking folks in entry level roles, progression is a bit of a kind of a curve that flattens off, right? It's kind of, you did it faster in your career, or seemingly faster in your career, and then it kind of tails off somewhat. So there's that component of it too. But I agree there with the point that kind of too early in a kind of business's life, and you can kind of overcomplicate and overthink it. You end up with an org chart you're having to change every 6 weeks, which is a painful exercise.
Yeah, it was, where's everyone going? And the levels just feel like overkill, because you have Molly Graham said this like quite. She's written a lot on this, and she said it quite well. Like at 50 people, like before you hit 50, you have about like 3 levels just naturally. Like you have your founders and execs, small number. You have somewhat seniorish and then somewhat juniorish, and like then you move to like her standard, I think it's pretty standard, is like an 8 levels. And she always says like at 50 people it will feel like overkill, because you won't have people at every level in each team, but at 150 you'll be really thankful you did 8 at 50 and got people used to it. So but I think that like setting it up is kind of a known problem. This is a known one. Like you don't do it early because it's a distraction to the business. And then you come in at around like 50 to 100 and you're like, 100 is a bit late, but you are like, okay, it's going to be a bit painful to now, because some people are going to be moving and that's going to be painful, but you do that as a one-off painful hit. And you just kind of are like prepared to do that. And you have someone like one of the four of us who has done it multiple times and you're used to doing it. You take the hit and you do that. I find the hardest thing is then like maintaining it, particularly when your manager level is not that experienced. Like the amount that they struggle with the difficult conversation, which is like, you're not bad. You're not, I don't have a like you're underperforming, but you're not going to get to progress every level every year. Or they want to make this higher that should be at this level, but they're insisting for salary that they need to be 3 levels above that. Like that's what it's the maintenance that I find, like the implementing, it's a known pain. It's the maintenance that I think is the bigger pain. But
isn't that the main? I think that you're not going to get around with that, but that becomes the job of the COO or whoever's fulfilling that role, coupled with a more competent HR lead, and it's all about middle manager training. It's all about calibration in performance reviews. It's all around those classic strong behaviors and educating. I think the question I would have for you all is 2 questions. One, which is the perennial problem of when you're implementing it for the first time, or you're hiring in somebody, and these are cusp people. These are people that really should be a senior 5 for the next year, but their manager wants to make them a 6, whatever the 5 and 6 is on your scale. And you find, and there are many people who are clearly a 5, everybody understands they're a 5, no problem. But probably a third of people who are on the cusp. And I think it's always an interesting philosophical question for sort of folks you like, well, what do you do with those people? Do you hold a tough line and say, here's the criteria, and this is a scaling business, there's a Series A, Series B, somewhere in that mix. Do you hold a tough line and say, nah, this is what it takes to be a 6, sorry, tick the box, drive it through? Or do you over level and then manage on the back end? So that's question 1. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer there. I think it's just different interesting philosophies and ways of handling it. But that's a problem that always comes up, always gets asked. And the question number 2 is what the broader, more controversial one around pay transparency, or even pay band transparency, and then overarching pay transparency, like Rob gets paid X as the COO, Mary gets paid Y as the marketing lead, Mohammed gets paid, it's just, or a level 6 engineer gets paid this. So I think that's also a sort of area ripe with landmines and different opinions.
Yeah, that's the big one. That's the big landmine one. But wait, before we answer the big landmine, let me do like the first one, which is like, do you over level and then take the pain later, or stand firm? I think we all want to say we stand firm, and that it's like over leveling is quite painful, because I love Rob's shaking his face. Like, it's painful because then you pissed off high performers in the org and like all sorts of other issues. But I think realistically, especially in a fast growing business, you're like competing for talent. You're always trying to like hire more than you think. Like, I don't know how much of us actually stay super, super firm versus let those cuspies, they have a new name, cuspies over level to 6. Or Dimple, you're the toughest.
Yeah,
you
Dimple,
stand
what
firm.
do you
Can you do
Go
it?
on, Dimple.
Yeah,
Go on.
Rob and I are like,
fist.
we're weak.
Oh God, it's going to sound awful. This is what the probation period is for, no?
Interesting.
That's true. I think that's
the
a fair
perspective,
answer.
though.
Well, what about for people who are already in the business and you're introducing
Then
them?
No. But what you do, so what I've done in the past, because again, it's like, I'm a real believer that you do not compromise on the competencies that you need from your team. But what you do say is, this is where you are currently falling slightly short. Here is a time horizon over which we will check back in. So be that 4-month time, 6-month time, whatever it is. These are things that I need to have seen from you. Now, actually, when I have done that, people have got there.
Yeah.
And then I have followed through and said, right, let's make the change. Great, fantastic. On to the next one. I think where we're bringing people in, there's always that element of unknown. And, as good as your interview process is, you don't really know what someone is like until you work with them. But I think that's why, let's say you really believe that this person could be a six and they should be, and you're not really going to know until they're in. They could be game changing and provide all this strategic value. You need a really robust probation process that sits behind that. And I think you need to have a really robust one anyway. But I think people are sometimes scared of failing or extending probation periods. But again, I don't think you should compromise on what you expect.
So do you bring them in at that cuspy person? Do you bring them in at a level 5 and say, if you want to be a level 6, this is what I need during your probation period? Or do you bring them in at a level 6 and then fire them if they're not good enough for it?
I would say it depends on how confident you are either way.
And what you're hiring for, right? Are you hiring for a level 5 or a level 6?
Also that.
Yeah.
Also that.
I think the point you raise here is excellent in the probation. The two use cases are different. For the probationary hiring in new, I think most people don't know the difference between a 5 and 6 and whatever your crazy scale is. So they don't ask that. They ask a job title and they just come on board. And I think there you slot them low and you just deal with it through the probationary period, extend it and do all of those good things into the performance management process. For the people, when you're implementing this system, as many of the listeners and folks will be and will continue for the depth of time to be, I used to be very much in your camp, Dimple, and fight the fight over like, this person's not a 6 yet. But that was because there was no norms. And I had in my mind what a 6 was. And there was maybe a bulleted list of these things. But everybody else, it was all a negotiation point. So what I found in the end was, again, you hold some degree of line. So somebody who's clearly a low or mid 5, you don't bend on stupid things. But people who are genuinely like, okay, they probably could be there in 6 months. I typically in these growing 50-person, 60-person organizations, I'd give the benefit of the doubt and manage on the back end, purely because I don't think there's any established baselines, and I'm more about managing my time as an executive to hold the line. And I've only got a certain amount of credits on sort of battles I want to fight with people. And this isn't the one I want to fight with the head of marketing that really thinks their person is a 6 and not a 5. It's like, okay, fine, have them as a 6. So I've sort of tempered my spiritual belief, which is very much in the temple of Dimple, to a
That should be a thing, by the way.
That is a thing now.
That should be a thing.
So I'm spiritually aligned, but just practically on the case of implementing this on true cuspy candidates. And we know there are some true cuspy candidates. You then just go, it's not worth the 6 months, just give them that, move on. I think the thing I would highlight here is that getting your leveling system right, because mid-manager junior people, it's not a big risk, but getting your leveling system right for the senior levels, you want to be really careful of. I would hold a much more your perspective on, I should be the CMO, I should be the SVP of all things commercial. And like, nah, you're a direct marketer. No. You're a senior director, sorry. And I'd hold the line there versus an associate. It's like, fine.
Oh, yeah. And that is typically what I'm kind of talking about, where your expectations of what you expect from someone that is leading a team, there will be certain things in there that you just cannot compromise on, because then kind of, the fallout from that is going to be much more than that one person potentially walking away. I think, the junior level, there's generally a bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
And mid-level.
Okay, so
I'm in the mid-level camp is flexible as well.
Just
whatever.
Focus on the VPs, and be very careful with the C-suite. Okay, so to wrap it up, I wonder if there is going to be dissension here, or if we're all just going to have the same opinion on this. Pay transparency. So one end of the spectrum is full transparency. You know what Mary, Bob, and Sally are making. Other in the middle, I would say, is transparent in your bands. Like this band covers from here to here, and then no transparency. No one has any idea. Where do you live? For people who are only listening, not watching, I'm smirking. I'm like literally smirking because I cannot wait for this.
No
Who's
idea.
going first?
What? No idea.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you had no idea your opinion. I'm like, that's the first timer. Okay, so you're like total. They exist, but no one knows them but you. COO?
If you can get away with it.
Okay. So that's that end of the spectrum.
I like junior roles where you're confident in your leveling system and you're confident in your benchmarking, have transparent bands, but not transparent where individuals are within bands, on the basis that it's all going to be public knowledge anyway, because people are going to talk about it. Senior levels, small teams where there's asymmetry of information, I don't think it's equitable. It's for me to know my senior leadership team salaries without them knowing mine. So transparency between senior leaders and shareholders in a small business, I think that's a moral point, I think, probably, more than anything else.
I like, okay,
but
Rob,
not
so you're
a
almost
hill
at
I'm dying on. Not a hill I'm dying on.
Okay, so you're pretty far to the transparency end, though. If your whole
Yeah,
senior
but we
leadership
don't
team knows
we
each
don't publish
other's
like SLT salaries to
everyone in the
the wider
business.
team.
But by level, not only are you clear on the levels, but within the level, you know each other's.
So yeah, so senior leadership team, transparency between ourselves, what our salaries are, but the rest of the business, that where there's a banding, a leveling system in place, people know what the bands and levels are, but not where anybody else is within that system.
Who's within the bands? Okay. Beautiful.
Where am I at? I think where you have a team that is, if we take Rob's front of house team, or if we take my lab team, where you have a very clear hierarchy and progression structure in place, I think you probably have to be quite transparent about what the pay bands are, because people will want to know, okay, what does progression look like? And some of that is very closely related to then securing a pay rise and that piece. So I think banding transparency there, because I think it is part of progression. I think within the rest of the business, I actually lean more towards JB's camp of, if you can keep it all hidden, great, because it can get very noisy and it can also lead to conversations of, well, I think I'm better than that person. Because the other issue is a lot of the way that pay is set depends on your skill set, market rate for your function and what you do.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I'm in marketing, I don't have a clue what the going rate for an engineer is, but I will just say, do I think I'm better or worse than that person? And therefore just make a straight judgment. I do think when you get to the senior leadership team, though, I think at that point, whilst you might not share what everybody else is on, you need to keep it as fair as possible.
And keep it, as close as possible. I agree.
And, I have seen, particularly at that level, and this is where JB's point of be very careful about who you give C-level titles out to at the beginning. I've seen that as businesses scale, you end up in situations where there is a massive gap. And I myself have worked in a situation where I've had somebody else at C-level paid almost double what I was paid.
So I should qualify, which is that, do I think you should be systemic? Yes. Do I think you should have pay bands that are fixed to levels and the levels per functions done with some reasonable degree of benchmarking against your local market conditions? Yes. Do I think managers should have very good conversations with their reports on where they are as a pay band, where their pay stacks up against a broad pay band that they're in, and generally what the pay band looks like at the level above? Yes. I think managers do that typically poorly, but I think that should be encouraged within some bounds. So I'm not a sort of an absolutist, it's all a black box, but I think this should be done on a one-on-one basis, on a specific needs basis. I also think that this should be done outside, and it should be a priority of the CEO, and it should be fair, and it should be the priority of the CEO, especially the bigger the firm, the more significant the firm with money and equity running through things, the more value in the firm, that there is a three-way, and in senior leadership, I'm probably a fan of having the board members involved as well, to ensure the inequality gets even out. And it's not inequality of sort of gender or those things, it's just inequality of time and all sort of weird legacy things happens. So I'm a fan of all those, but I'm a fan of doing it as a CEO possibly with a COO if the HR reports them, or if HR doesn't report, COO and the CHRO involved in a pretty black box way, because whenever you don't go black box, there's no middle ground, and there's just no middle ground. It just causes.
I think it's that point of all the noise. I would say I was I deeply want to be on the full transparency side, because statistically, like back to the actual equity piece, like you have less gender inequity, you have less racial inequity, you have less discrimination and inequity the more transparent things are. And that's a fact. So like it actually drives better equity. So I want to be on the side of full transparency for that reason. However, practically, it is so noisy, as you guys have said, to Bob, Sally, every single person knows every other person. That gets very that gets very noisy very fast. So I'm very similar on the keep it small, but I'm big on make sure you are truly rigorously examining any gaps that there are between individuals, if there are big gaps in groups, but also then looking at it systematically and being like, well, what is my gender pay gap? What is my pay gap from people coming from different income backgrounds originally? Really spending time on that data is
I've
where
got a challenge on that one, Kristen, because I think.
Oh, please do.
I think there's
all day, Rob.
I think there's attribution error on that. So I think the noise is there, whether you are transparent or not transparent about pay, because people are always going to look at their peers and say, "Oh, I work harder than Bob," or but they're not pulling their weight, whatever it means. Yeah. And I think that we imagine the noise is louder when there's a number attached to it around value.
Interesting.
So I think it's I think that these are conversations that happen in the pub anyway. Say hard to avoid.
I would.
So
sunlight is the best bleach.
I'd just quickly build on that and say I'm probably in a binary model of you either do the non-transparent, drip feed, try and keep it as closed as you can, sensible pay, you do all of the sort of sensible measures, but you keep it as closed as you can, literally as close as you can, old school if you like, or you go completely the other end of the spectrum and you go full radical. Everybody knows the sort of salaries and it is what it is, and it's part of your culture of the business, and that just forces you, rip the bandage off, and it forces you to be much more radically performance generated, because you're going to piss everybody off if JB is sat here and he's dialing it in, he's not earning a lot, and everybody's like, well, why do I have to work with that jerk, because he gets paid 3 times as much as anybody, but he's not as good as Rob, who's working really hard. And so you're advantaged of that. But I think you then got to go full transparency, maybe literally all the way up and all the way across on these things, and go much more radical. You just take so the conversation doesn't come about questions, it comes about validating the value of individuals, which you then have to manage almost certainly through a painful HR process, but at least you're doing it in open forum. So I think I'm at either end of the spectrum, but not in the middle.
I'll take the messy.
That's a good cop-out.
It is, isn't it?
I like your messy compromise though, Rob. I like the clarity of bands. I've actually not heard of a senior leadership team where every member of the senior leadership team knows the other members of the team's salaries. So that feels actually not that middle to me. That feels pretty.
But that's true. But that's purely driven by knowledge asymmetries, because I have access to everybody's salaries. The CEO has access to everybody's salaries, and that just doesn't feel right to me.
CFO does.
And the CFO obviously does. And so I just feel that that's half the leadership team, right? Knows everybody's, but the other half doesn't. It just feels where we're trying to build something together. We're all shareholders in the business. It just feels like it's not. I don't need that information asymmetry. That's not helpful.
Yeah, and I think to be honest, at that level, if you know that fairness sits at kind of the core of how your compensation has been structured as a senior leadership team, then you can trust that you're broadly all pretty level. And then if you go the other way and everybody knows what everyone else is saying, I think that being paid, I think there's actually quite an interesting one there of being the person sitting in the room, knowing that you are paid way more than everyone else across the table from you, thinking, how do I justify this?
Yeah.
I better
And I
bring
would
this.
be sitting
I
on the
really
other side
better.
being like, I hope you are working twice as many hours as I am. So I think there's an accountability element that I quite like from the transparency at that level.
Yeah.
Well, and transparency all the way up and down and across organizations. That's why I'm in the, if you go radical transparency, it's like, okay.
Go for it. Yeah, I felt like it was a bit of a trend 5 or 6 years ago where everyone was like radically publishing it externally as well. I've seen that die away. I haven't seen that in the past few years. Like there was a little spurt of it and then it kind of stopped.
There was also a
Does anyone
trend no titles as well, which is also
I hate that
somewhat
trend.
died. And a title of like, well, org charts are really academic. Let's not bother about that. That's also died. These all feel like experiments that have been done and they're like, oof, sounds good, practically doesn't scale and gives us all sorts of other problems. So let's go back to this.
But also how much of this is linked to the fact that when the businesses are flush with cash,
Exactly.
you can run these kind of experiments. But like when capital efficiency,
Everyone's paid a lot here.
Yes, exactly. You're like, I am not messing around my org chart. All of you need to get on with what you're supposed to be doing. This is a massive distraction. So I think also just financially, we don't have the room for that anymore.
Dimple, you're the benevolent dictator.
I thought I was
Practical benevolent dictator.
What was it?
Practical
Was
benevolent
it
dictator.
ruthless compassion or compassionate ruthlessness? But now you turn me into dictator, baby.
No,
I think
benevolent
ruthless
dictator.
compassion. Benevolent.
As long as
I
I was
aspire
like,
to be a
she was like
benevolent
the queen
dictator.
of communication. Yeah.
And I now
this
have
is
my
why
own
Dimple had
temple.
the title. This is why you have the title the exact we want to be. But yeah, the rest of us are sitting more messy middles, not standing as firm.
I am actually fun to work with, I promise.
Sounds it.
Oh, we know that.
I'm not working with you, Rob. I know how much you get paid. You go,
I know you want to tell everyone what I get paid, Rob. I'm not into that. Okay, I like this. There was more. Okay, I wasn't sure if we would have like, we'd all just fall in the exact same place, or if we'd be like one side or the other. I feel like we're actually all at quite different places in the spectrum. So,
No, I reckon give us the same problem, we'd all come up with it in the same circumstance. I reckon our solution would be very similar.
I think what it does
that's
expose,
interesting. Do a case study.
yeah, what it does expose is that, because I think that Rob's right, we'll just practically end up in the same place. But what I think it does expose is that the area of pay, there's quite a lot of philosophical, and you could take quite a lot of different philosophical positions on it, but practically you end up in sort of a similar place. I think on leveling, there's probably, you get to practical a lot faster, but all the interesting nuances in how do you handle the side cases and edge cases.
One of the most practical things I've seen done actually is the thing that we say more than anything else is that we will have a conversation about pay once a year, and that's it.
Yeah. Yes.
Once a year.
I like
that. Agreed.
And
I agree with that.
That's like the simplest thing you can implement. So kind of like
and it has to be.
Yeah, and you link it to your whatever your performance, skill, will, or performance promise matrix you come up with.
Performance values. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Agreed.
I suspect the other thing that we would quickly land on is that it's an 8 to 10 level scale. It's numeric. There's a IC route and an expert route and a manager route. People land on that fast. I think people also land on, you don't want to give out C-suite titles like at all fast, and give away VP titles and director titles. That's good. The question, I think, which is something you briefly brought up, Dimple, is the head of title. Now, I see giving out head of titles as quite a good catch-all. I can give them away, but hold it separate from the director VP area. So I can give a junior person a senior role because you're head of, direct marketing in Europe, Division 2 sales, and it's that feels good, but you're still a director level.
A team lead.
So I the thing I'd throw into the mix is that I would give away head of titles and manager titles, as long as they line manage somebody, quite freely, open on. I would be more precious around VP titles and guard, like anything, C-suite titles. Yeah. But I know different people have different opinions on titles and how deep that runs.
So I mostly agree with you in terms of C-suite and VP direct titles, for sure. The way that I think about the difference between head of and manager, so typically in the past, the way I've done it is manager titles or senior manager titles, they don't actually have direct reports. They're not actually managing anyone.
Yeah.
So that is...
They're managing work, not people necessarily.
Yeah, so that will be like the role where you're giving them some semblance of seniority, but they don't have people responsibility. And then head of is when you suddenly have a team of 5 or a team of 6 or whatever.
Or I would say that manager level, you might have a direct report. Like you might have, you're like learning.
One. No, at senior manager.
Like,
so
okay.
I think I'm just, do you know what, there's something about manager responsibilities that I think are quite often overlooked, particularly in the startup space where it's almost an anything goes. But and this is definitely a Goldman thing that I have walked away with. But like, there are not that many people in your life that has as much impact on your life as your line manager.
Yeah.
You think about the responsibility that comes with being someone's line manager, you know, how they feel about work, their performance, their compensation, their progression, all of that is in the hands of one person. Now, if you're going to give someone that title, they need to do it well and they need to know how to do it. They need to have the support to do it as well. So I'm actually a fan of slightly flatter organizations with less line managers, because I think that just becomes incredibly inconsistent in terms of the experience that people get across the organization as well.
Do you end up with like 300 direct reports then?
I'll be honest, I've got about 19 now, Rob, so you know.
So that's the downside.
How many direct reports do you have, Rob?
As few as possible. How have I got now?
Minimize it.
5, 6.
Yeah, I think that's probably
that's it.
My sanity.
I think 5, 6 is good. Yeah. 5, 6, 8 is like the max. Like that's the standard rule of thumb. Is 8 is everything gets painful after 8.
Guys, but the guy, the chap who runs Nvidia was talking about this recently, wasn't he? He has insane numbers of direct.
50.
He's like 50 or 75. Like he has huge numbers.
Different philosophy.
It's not a fair. It's not an apples to apples comparison because he's.
Yeah, that's.
This is worth another episode on reporting lines and orgs and these things.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to call time and say bye because we all need to go. But I'm going to add this as our next one, or at some point soon, we will do number of managers versus managees, direct report numbers, that whole fun. As a COO, but as everything else.
Right.
But I love it. This was a good one. It was lovely. I'm very glad I've heard all your opinions. And Rob, I kind of do love this senior leadership team thing. I want to say I want to live by this. I don't know if you can hold. Yeah, you guys can ask in the future.
The JV's accountability point is the one. Yeah.
Yeah, checking on the accountability. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Lovely to see you. Sure. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.